Good. How are you?
Pretty good. Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year's to you.
Let's
Wait,
just
you're
jump in.
Chinese. It's not New Year's yet, is it?
That's right. This is the fake New Year's. Um, I can't even remember when Chinese New Year's is. It's in February usually, but I guess it changes with the lunar holiday.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, not happy. I retract my Happy New Year's. It's not Chinese New Year's yet.
Happy white supremacist New Year's.
So let's just jump into it. I feel distraught and conflicted and just confused about what the appropriate reaction should be, just from society, I guess, to what has transpired in Minnesota over the last few weeks. Um, it seems like there's a couple things going on at once. The supposed motivating event was this YouTuber Nick Shirley went viral with a long YouTube and X video, now the most viewed X video of all time, supposedly, and very viewed on other platforms. Expose on Somali daycare fraud,
Hmm.
healthcare fraud, or alleged fraud. And because of that, the administration said it would marshal its resources to crack down on fraud associated with Somalis, both legal and illegal immigrants. And so they've sent now 3,000 ICE and CBP agents. They've shut off food stamps for the entire state. They've shut off various HHS grants, for a variety of welfare programs, social services, and they are rushing anti fraud investigators from the SBA, I think some of the other agencies, DOJ as well. And in this sudden crackdown on this one ethnic group, we've seen just, you know, every couple hours we see crazy videos come out. We've seen one person has been shot and killed, Renee Good, and we've seen just really. I mean, some of these videos you can't tell because, of course, it's like cell phone footage. Maybe there's context you're missing. Maybe there's an angle you don't see. But for some of these videos, it seems pretty clear cut that there are ICE and CBP agents who are just roughing up random citizens, asking for their papers, like a papers please thing. They're
Hmm.
knocking over and wrestling and roughhousing people with cameras and journalists and just citizens who are just documenting this type of thing. They're threatening people. They're saying, "Look what we did last week. You want
Hmm.
there's a video where a nice agent basically threatens and says, "You saw what we already did. Didn't you learn your lesson yet?"
Hmm.
I'm distraught, and sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time here, just giving you an overview. But I've spent so much time and effort in the first administration pushing back against lefties and liberals who claimed that the administration was Nazi-like or authoritarian or fascist because it was engaging in immigration enforcement. Because I just put it in context, looking at the facts and the history of Clinton, Bush, Obama, that Trump was actually deporting way less, that he was basically engaging in the same practices of previous administrations, that a lot of this rhetoric was not fair, it was not accurate, it did not reflect the facts on the ground. And I'm not sure what the term, what's the right term to apply, but there's a lot of weird stuff that is just night and day different from the first administration
I
that
mean,
has no bearing on ordinary immigration enforcement at all.
I first of all, so I was just Michelle Goldberg quoted in a tweet of mine in the New York Times today, about in an article about how the resistance libs were right, and it was a tweet in which I was acknowledging exactly what you're saying. That it turns out that the most hysterical pussy hats were right, as I think something to the effect of what I said, and it was, by the way, just like a reply to Jay Kang. It wasn't like a anything I was declaring to the world. It was just more or less a private slash public conversation with him on Twitter, but here's the and so I've been taking a lot of shit from liberals who are like, yeah, idiot, right? Like, we knew before you did, proving what irritates us about the left, which is that they'd much rather be right than build an actual movement. But whatever, neither here nor there. it's annoying, but I don't. But I remember those conversations that you and I would have, and people in our world, and we were very. I mean, it's not as if we were denied that Trump was an authoritarian, that he was, well, like his personality wise, that he would have be a dictator if given the chance. It just happened to be, and I think this was our argument at the time. At least it was mine. I'll just speak for myself. There were checks and balances in place, and just because you have, I mean, this is the strength of our system is that you can have somebody who's an aspiring dictator in the presidency, and our system has checks and balances that prevent him from actually overrunning our democracy. So while he was an authoritarian, that didn't mean that he was running a fascist regime, because he's not the entire US government. So that said, now it looks very different. I mean, and partially, I guess it's just because he's surrounded, he doesn't have people like the internal kind of never Trumper resistance deep state people in his administration. He's cleared the deck of those, but also because he seems just plainly willing to violate. Like there haven't been court orders yet. I don't know why, and not sure why the courts haven't worked fast enough, or maybe I'm unaware of them and I haven't read those stories. Kicking ice out of Minneapolis, but he seemed. But if one comes down the pipe, I have no doubt that he'll ignore it. And so, like, the checks and balances are only as good as the willingness of the president to comply with them. And if he's not willing to comply with them, then you have another situation on your hand. So I don't, this is all a very convoluted way of saying, I don't think you were wrong. I don't think I was wrong. But I also think that the resistance libs who we were accusing of exaggerating things at the time also weren't wrong. They just, it's just now it's manifesting. It wasn't manifest at the time. And now it is, for some reasons that'd be very interesting to explore, but the conditions were not ripe then, and they are now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some of them were still wrong. It's just like if you throw a million stones every
Right.
direction, one's going to hit the target. They were kind of scattershot. And the argument that I made then, and I would still make now, is that let's just kind of put U.S. immigration enforcement in context in advanced countries, advanced democracies, industrial states, whether you're in Taiwan or Japan or Korea or Denmark or France or what have you, or Mexico for that matter. There's immigration enforcement. If you enter without documentation, there are penalties. Sometimes they look very ugly. People are deported. Many countries make it very difficult to naturalize. You have to, have permission. You have to have the right documentation. You have the right work visas. There are many steps for people to naturalize. The U.S. in a global context is relatively lenient, is relatively open. There's this kind of shadow system where for decades the U.S. has permitted millions of undocumented immigrants as part of a effort to keep prices low, wages low. Big industries import them. The U.S. government looks away. It's a kind of like a nod and a wink that Trump called out, and many politicians from both parties have basically nodded and winked to the system that we've had that really kind of took off in ways that were unusual under Biden. Biden, the number of undocumented immigrants reached a peak that we hadn't seen in over 100 years. Something like over 15% of the country became undocumented or born outside of the country. That's we haven't seen that since the turn of the century or so.
Mm-hmm.
So all those things are true, but I would continue to debate it and encourage like a sane, reasonable immigration system that takes into account there's a lot of people living here that do contribute to the economy, but there have to be certain limits. And I think most people agree that people who come here illegally and commit crimes should be on the top of the list of folks who are deported. But what's happening in the last few weeks is unrelated to all that, right?
Right.
Like,
I was going to say
um,
immigration is almost beside the point right now.
it's beside the point because look, I write about fraud, stealing from the government, whether in the form of waste or outright fraud, is very serious. I've written about it in the housing context and all kinds of corporate subsidies, defense contracts. A lot is stolen from the taxpayer. The GAO estimates that over $550 billion a year is lost to fraud. And that's just up for the federal government. There's all these state programs, especially here in California. There's a lot of fraud. Um, and people know that. People are angry about that. But what came out of this Somali thing, it's like, you know, this isn't about, this is no longer about fraud. I mean, there were several programs during COVID, including a kind of like a Meals on Wheels type thing, like Feeding the Future or something like
Yeah.
that, where there were a number of individuals who were of Somali background who did defraud the government, who did steal, who did, you know, make phony invoices and claim that they fed people that they did not feed. And the DOJ in the District of Minnesota, along with, in concert with the Attorney General of Minnesota and local investigators, police and FBI, arrested something like 56 of them, got them indicted,
This
got
is like old
convictions.
news in
This is old
Minnesota.
news
Like,
that happened under Biden.
yeah. Mhm.
And, so far under Trump, I think only 4 or 5 additional people have been indicted. So, like, close to 80 to 90% of these convictions happened under Biden. And that's the way the system is supposed to work. And we need more auditors. We need more investigators. We need more FBI agents that are working on civil fraud. We need more DOJ lawyers working on it. But what this YouTuber did was walk around to home healthcare agencies without calling to
In
calling
daycares.
later to confirm any of the details. Many of these places had already been shut down or investigated. He walked around, opened normal healthcare
You mean
practices,
daycares? Are you talking about the daycares, the healthcare?
both daycare and healthcare. I mean, part of the video, he walks around a healthcare kind of pavilion where he's like, I've never seen so many healthcare facilities next to each other. They're all competing with one another. That doesn't make sense. It's like, have you never been to a medical office building?
They're always clustered together.
They're clustered
In
together
every city.
intentionally.
Yeah.
And he walks in, he sees patients and doctors and goes, "Can I get some health care here?" And the guy's like, "What are you talking about?" And then he leaves and goes, "See, that was fraud." It's like,
Right.
when I put together a story, when I'm writing about fraud, I'm crossing every T and dotting every I after looking at the evidence and calling people, calling, every person involved to make sure I'm careful when I make an allegation or make a claim in my story. He's just, and some of the stuff it's just fabricated. People didn't commit fraud. There's no evidence of that. Some of
Mhm.
these centers certainly might be part of something, but he didn't prove it in that video. But right after that video comes out, the vice president says we've got a Somali problem
Mhm.
in America, and this reporter deserves a Pulitzer, and we've got to rush resources. It's like,
Mainstream media is owned.
yeah, it's like, what? Like, just because a few individuals committed a crime that has been documented does not mean you can condemn an entire group.
I'm
And this
also
is just outright
confused.
ethnic scapegoating.
Most Somalis in Somali ethnic Somalis in Minneapolis, my understanding is, are American citizens, right?
Sure, yeah.
Overwhelming majority. So I don't know. I just don't know this, partially because I don't even know if any of these fraud allegations are true outside of Feeding Our Future, which is old news. But was this conducted principally by immigrants or by American citizens of Somali descent? And the reason I ask is because, aside from just the vilification of an entire ethnic group, it also begs the question as to why surging ICE is the answer to this scandal, if it wasn't actually immigrants principally who were doing it.
Well, there was the Manhattan Institute piece that also preceded this, but came in
Rufo.
sequence, like to help blow this up. That claimed that the fraudulent money was being siphoned to Al Shabaab, the Al Qaeda affiliate
Yeah.
in Somalia, and then that was based on a single quote from a retired police officer in Seattle. And when
Who
local
disowned it.
Minneapolis reporters called this this copy says, "Well, no, I have no evidence of this. He has been working on this in decades. He has no idea about what's going on with Somalis in Minneapolis." So the Manhattan Institute basically fabricated this
Yeah.
claim. And
By
it's
the way,
something.
I challenged Rufo because I was like, argument with Rufo on Twitter about it, and he's like calling me names, and I said, I called him out specifically on this point. What about the Al Shabaab thing, and also the Haitian cats and dogs thing, another bullshit story that he amplified? No response. I mean, I was expecting some kind of like weak defense, but he has no defense. He just ignored it altogether. He can't defend this article.
I would make the same point that I made hundreds of times, or at least dozens of times, in peak era of woke. Back in 2015, 2016, 2017, when it was lefties and liberals saying that, hey, we shouldn't hire white men. White men do this. White men do that. I'm saying, well, like, just for any ethnic scapegoating, what if you put Jews in that headline? What if you put Jews in that demand? What if you put Jews in that DEI rule around who we can hire and not hire? It doesn't sound so good anymore. I would do the same thing to what the Trump administration is doing now. I would say, just as imagine what JD Vance is saying about Somalis, you put Jews in that rhetoric instead.
It
We
would
could,
go something like, well, Minneapolis has a Jewish problem.
and you
America has a Jew problem.
that's exactly
No,
what I'm saying. We have a Somali problem we need to get rid of. It's like, would you ever say that about another ethnic group that has more power? It's just this is a vulnerable group of, they're black, they're Muslim, they're tiny, they have no political resources, no super PAC. They've got, I guess, one member of Congress, but they otherwise have no resources to push back. This is just someone that you can bully and they can't fight back.
no. Yeah, so I think that we're probably both in agreement, but correct me if I'm wrong, that this immigration surge really isn't about the Somali fraud scandal, nor is it, in my opinion, even about immigration. It's about the people who are the person who was shot and killed was an American citizen, of course. The people who there's these videos of people being jacked up are mostly Americans, as far as I can tell. Or at least they're people who are like saying I'm an American citizen and they're jacking them up anyway. It seems like, I mean, it just feels as if like there is a obvious agenda here, and the agenda is to pick a fight with people who don't support um, Trump's deportation agenda, people who don't support Trump, and incite some sort of civil unrest that will allow them to crack down even farther. So the fact that it's about immigration enforcement is all like almost beside the point. It happens to be the pretext by which they're surging these forces into the city, but the real goal is to create chaos and pandemonium and provoke backlash. That seems like it seems pretty clear that that's what they're after to me.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you see these videos of American citizens being knocked to the ground or asked in their car, prove your citizenship, and they're surrounded by men with masks and guns.
Yeah, it's. Do you know, like, I just don't know. I haven't looked into it. Do you know, like, what the status is of any legal challenges to this? Like, are there any cases winding themselves through the
I
court?
haven't read it, but I know the state of Minnesota, I assume through the AG, but I don't know, has filed um, some litigation blocking what ICE is doing.
It
I
just
should read it, but it's like, I don't know. Just as you're saying that it's not about immigration, it's also not about fraud.
right.
United Health, the healthcare conglomerate that is in the suburbs, the headquarters is in the suburbs of Minneapolis. The Wall Street Journal, using just data analysis, looking at the CMS payments from Medicare and other forms of evidence, found tens of billions of dollars in fraud of United Healthcare stealing from the taxpayer by upcoding, by saying when someone goes in for a certain procedure, they will change the procedure's billing number in the system so it's billed as something more expensive. And they do
Mhm.
this systematically all throughout the country, mostly through Medicare Advantage, but through other programs to rip off taxpayers, and that's a big problem. And you can go through the very large list of other fraudulent programs, and I'm not saying that the welfare, whatever, like housing programs, home health care, daycare, there probably are some problems in there, but they're not doing it in a race neutral, let the evidence lead manner where they're using the rule of law to say, hey, we've got to prosecute fraud. No, they're making this about an ethnic group. They're making it about a racial group.
They're making it about a racial group, and they're making about politics, which is to instigate a fight with people who are politically opposed to this president. It, remember how, like, in the first term there was all this talk about how, like, how much we've learned about how much these laws actually rely upon norms, and if you violate the norms flagrantly, then much of this stuff falls apart and there's no legal recourse to it, which was true. But now it feels as if, like, it's almost the same theory is being tested, but with the actual law. Like, the Trump administration can send in these ICE goons and basically give them instructions to do whatever they want to, like however they're communicating that message to them. It seems that they are communicating that message to agents on the ground. Number one, we're not going to restrain you. You shouldn't feel constrained by any sort of niceties around statutory or constitutional law. Number two, if you instigate these incidents, you will be professionally recognized and rewarded for it. I think somehow that message seems to be what's being put through to these ICE agents, and it's flagrantly illegal. But, like, if you don't, it's like, who cares if it's illegal? But the federal government is doing it. Then who's going to enforce the law? I mean, it seems like he's like almost begging that question. Who's going to stop me if I'm the president? I'm giving these direct orders and they're illegal. Okay, you can sue me. A judge can hold me in contempt or enjoin me, but who's going to physically stop me from doing it? The local police? Well, maybe. And that seems to be kind of, at least there's gestures towards that happening with Larry Krasner, et cetera, threatening that he will prosecute ICE agents who act outside of the law as is appropriate. But, like, that's an insane point. If we get to if we get to that point, then we're, like, flirting with civil war. So that's scary enough if we get to that point. But, like, I don't even know if that's possible for local and state agencies to be able to coordinate and, like, an offensive against the federal government if the federal government is just ignoring state and federal laws. So that's what I fear. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but that's what I fear is the moment that we are being driven to, and it seems like it's on purpose.
Yeah, it's scary. It's spooky. I feel like I've spent so much the last decade calming people down about politics. Like,
Mm.
you know, I'm generally a trust in America person, that America is resilient, strong institutions. You look back in history, in the early 70s, we had hundreds of bombings, mostly from leftist groups. We had all kinds of turmoil during the Vietnam War. We had a very violent crack epidemic in the 80s. We had the war on terror, and these were serious challenges to the very fabric of society in various forms. And more or less, the Constitution and the American way of life persisted, and in fact, our freedoms expanded in many ways. I, I'm not so sure. I don't want to endorse what you're saying wholeheartedly, but of course it's running in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, the thing that scares me most.
Where's the de-escalation ramp? Where,
Yeah, the thing that scares me most is that there's no apology for it. So, like, even during like the run up to the Iraq War, flagrantly illegal, wrong-headed, violating all these international norms, probably violating a lot of U.S. laws as well in the run-up to it. But Bush was obsessively lawyerizing all this stuff and trying to make a case that he was liberating the Iraqi people. So this was like a moral reason to go to war, and all these these armies of lawyers just saying that, oh no, he's authorized to do this, he's authorized to do that. And one might be cynical and say, well, that just shows how fake the law is, because whoever hires the most lawyers can get away with whatever they want to. But the act of hiring lawyers and litigating this stuff was a sort of reinforcement of the validity of the rule of law. The fact that that felt not just compelled, but like really it was priority number one for him to fight this fight in the courts and in public opinion. The fact that Trump seems utterly unconcerned about that, both in foreign policy and domestic policy, he's just jacking Venezuela for oil, right? He's not even like he's at first it was about fentanyl, which doesn't come out of Venezuela, but that pretense dropped as soon as they did the Maduro operation, and now he's just flagrantly saying, "I'm just taking their oil, and that's what I'm doing," and it's like the nakedness of it is leading. I forget who it was. Somebody prominent. It was either a prominent like conservative pundit or somebody in the administration you might remember who gave some. Maybe it was Stephen Miller who gave some interview where he's like, "Well, now the liberals will learn that there's just power. Like this is just about like we can do what we want to. The fact that they're like the international rules, like the rules of international law are the rules based international order has always been a fiction. It's always been about power. So like China's not going to mess with us because we have power, not because we violated some international norm." And that's kind of true because behind all of these norms and all of this etiquette is just raw power. But the etiquette and the norms do matter quite a bit. They have quite a restraining force. And if they didn't, then these governments wouldn't go to lengths to try to win those debates all the time. And now I feel like it's like they're like whoever it was who gave that interview is just they are reifying this idea that in fact, yeah, that is where we are now, where the law doesn't matter. It's just whoever has power. And there's no reason to believe that that's going to stop just with foreign policy, that's not going to be reflected in terms of the way that our government treats its own citizenry. It's obvious that one is going to bleed into the other.
Yeah, if you take this to its logical ends, it can get very dark. Like, if yes, international law, the ICC, the United Nations, all these things that were kind of created or reified after World War II to prevent another world war or atrocity like the Holocaust. Um, yes, the critics were always right. Like at the end of the day, that a lot of these rules are just wielded by powerful countries to their own ends. They're not equally applied. They're certainly not applied in the same way to powerful countries. Poorer countries, weaker countries get the hard end of the stick. The war criminals who end up getting prosecuted are never hailing from France or the United States or Great Britain or Russia. They're tiny countries in Africa or the former Yugoslavia. Those are the folks who actually get prosecuted for human rights violations. But and so as just like looking at this from like an academic point of view, there's part of me that's like, okay, yeah, Trump is just a mask off for what we've always assumed to be true. But then you kind of take a step back and it's like, no, that's way too abstract to think about, because if this accelerates in the way that means that all forms of small L liberalism, the U.S. Constitution, our basic regard for human rights and human decency don't matter, and what
Right.
only matters is who holds the biggest gun in America. That's mob rule.
Yeah.
That's gangster government, and that's a system in which the strong just simply dominate and harm the weak, and um, that's much worse than just a mask off. That's a different
Yeah.
animal than what we've lived under. That's a different society than the last 150 years of the American experiment post Civil War. So I don't know. Again, I guess here's a different way to look at this. There are Andrew Callahan and some others have posited that the timing of this Minnesota crackdown perfectly coincides with the Epstein documents release, which was very botched. The first round was a tiny percent of what they were supposed to release, and then many of those documents were completely redacted. They're really not supposed to overly redact unless there's truly a national security or doxing concern around one of the victims, not around protecting the identity of one of the powerful people in there. And they still have dragged their feet and they've not released most of the documents. Perhaps this crackdown in Minnesota is simply a distraction from this Epstein story, which was really the very first negative story to stick to Trump.
Right.
There's been a lot of criticism, a lot of mini scandals. Nothing has really persisted more than 3 days, usually more than a few hours. online when there's a negative story about Trump. He's kind of Teflon. He keeps going. Nothing sticks. The Epstein thing was the first story to really stick,
Hmm.
shape his poll numbers, and really become part of the cultural dialogue around Trump, where both left and right can be like, yeah, it's pretty weird that he demanded the release of these things. Now he's refusing to. He's lying. He's dragging his feet. He's
He
threatening
lost
people.
MTG, which I think was very very significant, more significant. I think in when we look back on this in the future than
Yeah,
it
he
seems
lost one of his most
right
loyal members of Congress because he betrayed her on many issues. But finally, the last leg of this was she supported the release of these files that he demanded
now. Hmm.
kept secret, be kept secret. So I don't know. Like maybe that's the most optimistic way to look at this. That he is kind of Trump is a political animal. He will do anything to survive and to continue. And his heart is not necessarily in this Minnesota crackdown. It's just this kind of mass distraction tool because he knows if he ramps up the violence and the turmoil and the chaos in Minneapolis, gets people spooked around that, they're going to stop talking about Epstein, which is kind of
Right.
true. We've kind of stopped talking about it as a culture.
It could well be. It almost doesn't matter with this president because it's almost like I don't even know if he thinks in those terms. Like it might be that he just had the vibe that things weren't going well with him for him. Epstein was a big part of it, but it was just sort of like impulsive almost. Well, let's gin up the base by doing some big macho bold move in Minneapolis, and then that becomes the major issue of the year. And then it's almost like the fact that it was a distraction from Epstein ultimately doesn't even matter because that takes on its own momentum and carries us in a different direction. It's just like, it's like the tail wagging the dog thing with Clinton. You could be like, yeah, Clinton was probably like, I need to change the headlines of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So I'm going to bomb this pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, right? It was probably that calculated and that specific. With Trump, it's just like this, like amorphous, just kind of emotional driven chaos. And so, like, to distract from this, maybe there will be another thing. He's maybe he'll go to war with Iran because people are starting to sour on him on the Minneapolis stuff. It's just like it's totally unpredictable, and it's almost like to try to find a pattern in it feels almost pointless.
Yeah, no, it's tough because Trump seems to be relatively decentralized. Um, Actually, kind of like Biden, where Biden kind of seemed to outsource a lot of his decisions to like a council of gray-haired elders that have advised him for his entire career, and they kind of took on the supersized status in the White House. Um, Trump, rather than having these kind of veteran political operators helping shape things, he's got these competing factions within the administration that keep offering him kind of extremist ideas. I mean, this attempt to imprison Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, apparently it's just the idea of one faction led by Bill Poult, the Federal Housing Administration director, who has apparently he knows that the best way to get Trump's attention is to print out memes on gigantic placards, and when he sees Trump, he holds them. So he gives them an idea of what it would look like when something happens. So he put a most wanted poster um,
Uh-huh.
for this Powell idea, and last year he'd kind of pushed criminal prosecutions of I think the AG of New York, Letitia James, and I think James Comey, using these kind of housing related
Hmm.
issues,
Right, the mortgage
the
fraud.
mortgage fraud. So he's very good at getting Trump's attention. He'll show up at one of these meetings or even at on the golf course and then egg on these kind of extreme
He's
prosecutions
like
of.
Laura Loomer. He's like,
It's like Laura Loomer essentially, but with a little bit more power, or maybe even less power. I'm not even sure who has the more power there. Um, and and Stephen Miller, of course, has his faction, and there are folks at DHS. And when Trump, I think, feels like he's on the defensive, he looks to these competing factions and is very deferential to them.
hmm.
This is by the way, this is not reassuring. This is a
Right,
dynamic that is not healthy for American
insane.
governance.
Yeah, yeah.
And ironically, I think the reason people wanted Trump over Biden is that they didn't like the idea of a kind of like a shadow government of this council of gray haired elders who are really running the country. But for Trump, it's even worse. It's like these, just whoever's whispering in his ear these kind of crazy ideas. Supposedly, the Estee Lauder heir Ron Lauder was the one who slipped him the idea of seizing Greenland. It was not. This is not an organic Trump idea. This is a just a random billionaire, right
Yeah.
wing billionaire
I mean,
idea.
this is another thing that I feel like we should eat a little crow on is like, well, not necessarily because I think my perspective is more complicated than this, but it's like I kind of miss the establishment now. It's a similar thing dynamic that happens in media where like we were all complaining about the mainstream media gatekeepers and how they were stepping on these stories, and all that was true. They were absolutely crafting narratives and being dishonest with their gatekeeping powers and their sort of their dinner party culture, and they're not wanting this in the news and wanting this other thing in the news because of their political biases. But it's like you take away the gatekeepers and you have Nick Shirley. You have like all of a sudden you're like, oh, the gatekeepers served a role even if they abused their power. And it's a similar thing here with like the gray-haired establishment folks. Well, having a break on these impulses is actually turns out to be important. And to return to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the law stuff, like the way I see it is that when you do have things like the need to build an international coalition around a war, an invasion, or need to get a UN resolution, this stuff that you could in retrospect say, oh, that's all fake, right? That's all fake because in the end, the powerful countries are going to get their way because the system is all rigged. And so the mask off thing is just like, now we just see the world for what it is, which is whoever has the most bombs. But the thing is that you divert a lot of that, but by having those rules in place, you divert a lot of that energy into having to deal with them, right? You have to spend a year like having this debate, having your setbacks and your humiliations in the media, having the UN come out. Maybe your invasion plans might change because of the lack of international support you're drumming up, et cetera, et cetera. There's this restraining force that has on it, which would be easy to see if you apply it to the domestic context, where it's like, well, if we look at like court rulings and the U.S. Constitution is just a bunch of fake, it's all fake, right? Because it's like whoever has the power rules. Then it's like, okay, well, would you rather live in a world in which we just all agree not to even acknowledge the legitimacy of laws in the Constitution then, and literally whoever's got a gun can make you do whatever they want to, and then you go, oh, at least it's more honest, right? It's like that's a more violent, awful world to live in, and it seems like that's what Trump is sort of creating or reifying.
Yeah, it feels like the end of Western civilization.
Yeah.
And I hate that the people who are doing it are claiming that they're the ones taking back Western civilization. Like, no, you're making this more like a sub-Saharan African or Middle East country where the dominant ethnic group claims that the country is for them because countries are based on race, not on ideas.
Right.
And that there's no point in an independent judiciary or a rule of law or checks and balances because it's just about who has the power, who has the guns.
I hate that these people call themselves Christians. Like I'm not a Christian. Well, I've been reading this history of Christianity, so it's been on the brain. But I guess I actually am a Christian. I don't go to church, and I don't know if I believe in God. But my values are fundamentally Christian, and like so, like this book is about how it's called Dominion, and it's about when you look outside of Christendom, like it was like the Greeks, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans and the Vikings and the Mongols and these pagans. There was never any conception. It was like it would be bizarre for them to hear you make a case that you shouldn't like punish the weak and that the weak have human rights, that they have inherent value. Like this was just completely a foreign idea to even the Greeks and the Romans who we so revere. Until Christianity came along and said, the meek shall inherit the earth. Those who are weak are closer to God than those who oppress them. Da, 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 da. This is what we're rejecting now. Like that basic value is what has been completely rejected by the Trump administration, where they're like, no, if you're a weak power on the international stage, you get dominated by your more powerful neighbors, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's just the way the world works. And the same can be said about Somali Americans, despite the fact that despite their American citizenship, if you're powerless, then that's just the way of the world. It's just a very
It's
um,
anti-Christian. No,
yeah.
I mean, just as this has been explained to me. I'm not an expert in Rene Girard's thinking, but I
Mhm.
understand that J.D. Vance and others read him in college and thought he was, the most influential thinker for their own personal philosophy. But Girard's one of his great insights is that previous to Christianity, all religions were essentially based on scapegoating. That if something bad happens, you blame the outside tribe or demon or spirit or
Mhm.
God, and you cast out people on the periphery of your village, and if something negative happens, you blame them, and the religions kind of reified and reflected law and culture that was based on scapegoating
Mhm.
and based on kind of tribal dynamics. And Christianity came along, and here was the prophet who was the person who was scapegoated, who was fingered
Mhm.
and pointed to as, here's the dangerous outsider, and who had to die for because he was scapegoated, and he died for our sins. And Gerard basically teaches that's what gives us in the West and Western philosophy are concerned for human rights and universal freedoms, because this is the first religion to kind of reject um, scapegoating by making their prophet the scapegoat.
Mhm.
And what have we seen in the last month, in the last 3 weeks? It's just organizing scapegoating campaign, a hate
Yeah.
campaign for an ethnic minority group. And an additional point to this is just where are people? All these liberal billionaires over the last 10 years kept saying like racism is the problem, identity is our main issue, and they did this in a very they did this very poorly. And then, we've talked about many times about how these liberal billionaires probably made racism worse. They made identity politics worse in the way that they focused on these issues. But here's actually the very first case, really, of my adult lifetime where the government, as an entity, as an organized entity, from the president, from the Oval Office to the Department of Homeland Security to the folks who have walkie talkies and guns on the ground, are doing organized ethnic scapegoating
Yeah.
around race and ethnicity. And where's civil society? Where are the tech billionaires? Where are the liberal billionaires? It's
Mhm.
complete crickets.
I haven't read Gerard either, and so not to get too poetical, but my vague recollection from is that the scapegoating, the term comes from a ritual in which I don't know what tribal peoples, but like now there's this, when we say scapegoat, we tend to think of like as synonymous with fall guy, right? You blame this person, you say it's this person's fault, and everybody goes, oh, it's that person's fault, and they think it's that person's fault, so then they blame them. Whereas the original form of scapegoating was literally just taking a goat and just saying like something bad befell the community. And they're like, okay, they knew what they were doing. They're like, we're going to take this goat and we're going to say all the blame is this goat's fault. Nobody actually thought that the goat caused it, but it was like, but we're going to sacrifice this goat in order to heal the community, right? So this goat is our sacrifice. We'll contain the blame in it and slaughter it, and then things will be set right. And that's like that's how kind of monstrous it was, or how should I say it? That's like the political logic of this administration now is like literally like, oh, things are going bad, let's pick this group to blame, let's pick this group to, we don't even need to come up with the cases why it's this fault. It's just we'll channel that collective rage towards this one specific target, and all the folks who are supporting us will fall in line, and all the influencers and the TPUSA people will fall in line behind these talking points, and then it'll heal us, it'll bring us together as a conservative movement. Obviously, what doesn't bring together the country. I'm riffing now. I'm sort of talking half out my ass, but I think you're onto something with the scapegoating thing, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It's so dark. I hate this. Sometimes, like in 2020 and in the depths of the pandemic, I could kind of see an out because I'm like, people are going to get exhausted of this, of the extremism, and the lockdowns don't make sense economically, right? Like, there people are going to rebel if their kids can never get an education. And look, you get people, good people, and ask them about these bans on hiring white people or some of the craziness of DEI, and they wouldn't agree with it. They'd say, okay, we've got to do something around racial injustice, and it's not fair what we're doing, but we it's something. Most people were kind of reasonable when you pull them aside, and I kind of I think Americans are essentially good people, and the more they notice what's happening in Minnesota, they're going to react negatively to it. So I see a positive from American society. I don't think Americans are particularly racist or hateful. I
I agree, but is it going to matter? Like, it's like doesn't it feel like a weak thread to be like, well, like this year is the midterms, like that's always the answer, right? Because we live in a formally democratic system, and it's like, well, they'll have their moment of accountability when the voters go to the ballot box, they're drummed out of Congress, and then we'll have a balance of power, and then there will be a new president, and things will be set back right. It feels like way too weak. I'm not calling for anything radical, but it feels like if that feels like almost like a fantasy, because if the Democrats take back, say the Democrats take back both chambers of Congress, do we really think that Trump is going to act differently when it comes to things like sending ICE and the National Guard, and these actions for which he seeks no congressional authority, starting these wars? Is he going to be restrained by that? And then if he's not going to be restrained by that, then the question becomes, well, then where are we going into 2028? Like, do we have a Republican Party that's going to be constrained by the fact that there's an election? It just
Well,
like the
I'll
fact
tell you this. Just to back up, if Democrats take back the House and the Senate, it's a very uphill climb to take back the Senate. The government is going to be closed for much of next year. There's going to be a funding showdown. Trump's not going to budge, and the government is closed. I think the mini shutdown from a few months ago, from October, November, is a tiny preview.
I mean, that wouldn't be so bad of an outcome, except that doesn't Trump, I mean, compared to alternatives, but doesn't Trump, I think, showed in the last shutdown, and I don't know this, so I'm asking you, but he had, the president has some sort of authority to like green light certain agencies and say, we're going to keep these agencies going. And it's not just like, the vital ones for public safety or whatever. Like
Yeah, I mean,
he has some discretion, right? So he could be
yeah,
like, no, we're going to keep ICE funded. We're
yeah,
going to keep the DoD funded, which they always do. We're going to keep ICE funded. We're going to keep all those parts of the U.S. government that enforce my will open and paid. Those people will continue to get paid, and we'll just shut down everything else.
yeah. That's probably likely.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, this was a great first episode for 2026.
Yeah,
Super.
excited for this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, good to talk to you.
Yeah. I feel like we should apologize to our listeners, but I think they understand.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, man.
Take care. Peace.
Have a good one.